Thank you so much. Hello. So I swear Stu and I did not practice with him giving me this perfect lead in to the title of my talk, Let's Learn Together. So I have to confess, when Stu Kent first asked me to talk at this event, I gave him the title and the content description, and then they told me I was going first, and I was like, uh-oh, that's a bold move on their part. But when you go first, you change your mind about what you want to cover. And so while I will talk a little bit about some of the different frameworks from service marketing and other areas that we can use to inspire and encourage co-creation, I actually want to spend most of my time today talking about what they all have in common. So there's tons of different frameworks in the pedagogy literature and in services and other areas that we can draw from. In online pedagogy, you hear them talking a lot about facilitating connections. In particular, if you want to have a really engaging online class, you really want to make sure that you're doing all you can to have the student make connections to the content of your course, create opportunities for them to connect with the instructor and opportunities for them to connect with each other. The recipe might be something like, make sure you have a discussion board so they can connect with each other, or make sure you have team projects so they're connecting with their peers. Things like synchronous sessions so that they can sign on to Zoom and get to know you as an instructor. And so there's a lot of really pragmatic things that we can do to make sure that in online courses and immersion courses that we're facilitating connections across these three fronts. So another framework that we can use comes from service marketing and looking at our customers as partial employees. And I think you guys know how our students really think they're our customers. We hear that a lot. Get lots of customer satisfaction feedback from students, right? It's always fun to remind them that they are also the product, which adds an interesting dynamic. But if we're thinking about them as partial employees, we can draw on this framework, right? So there's three levers that we can pull to get students to do what they're supposed to do in a class. First, are we giving them role clarity? Do they know what they're supposed to do? So what are the specific behaviors? What's the timing of them or the sequence, the relative importance of the behaviors, whether there's discretion. Next, we have to make sure they can actually do the things that we're asking them to do. And so self-confidence comes into play here, because if you've got students with lower self-confidence, they aren't going to think that they have the ability to do what you're asking of them, right? And so they'll kind of opt out. And then lastly is motivation. So what are the rewards that we're giving them to actually do the work of the course? There's extrinsic rewards like grades, right? But the thing about these extrinsic rewards is that it's dependent on whether our students care about their reward, and a lot of mine do actually care about grading, but it also depends on whether they feel like they're being allocated fairly. So if they think that grades are a black box and are arbitrary, or if they feel like they're being graded differently, then grades are going to stop being a motivating factor for our students. And so we're going to start seeing a drop in performance. All right, so then another framework, the learning mindset. I'm sure you guys have heard about this one a fair amount. But you can draw contrasts between students who do have the right learning mindset and those who don't. So this belief versus skepticism. I think we've all had that skeptical student that's kind of leaning back in the chair, like eyes in a perpetual state of rolling. And you're like, oh man, I lost that one before I even started. So what can we do to get them to lean in and to believe, right? How can we get them to be curious and to really want to grow instead of just getting that rubber stamp to say, yeah, I took that class so I can get my degree so I can get that job? How can we get them to take ownership over their experience? Feeling that sense of ownership is critical to co-creation. If they feel like education is something that's happening to them, they aren't going to lean in. They're just going to wait for you to do something. But as we know from Stu, like, they need to do something. They need to own it to really get the most out of our classes. And then just getting them to trust that they can grow and that they can learn and that they can get better, that their skills aren't fixed. So when you look at all of these different frameworks together, and again, going after Stu is like the worst, because I promise I was going to use this analogy. But when I started, I was like trying to draw boxes and arrows and like depict the relationships. It's hard to take the academic out of a girl, right? Oh my gosh, though, it was a mess. There were arrows going in both directions, all over the place. Because the thing is, this is like a hearty stew. And the more you intermix this together and stir the stew, like, the deeper the flavor gets, and they build on each other. Because if you can, make sure that you're allocating rewards fairly through those extrinsic motivators, you're going to grow the students' trust in you, and that trust is going to deepen the connection with the instructor, and it's going to make your students more willing to engage with the content because they trust you and they have that connection with you. And when they're engaging with the content, they're getting more excited, they're more willing to connect with their peers. And it is going to improve their mindset around whether they can do it and whether they can take those risks. So the thing is, what's underpinning all of this is trust, right? Trust is the thing that's the secret sauce that is making this magical stew happen. My stew does not have potatoes, but So I want to talk today mostly about how I build trust. And the reason I want to share this is because we are all here because we want to innovate in the classroom, right? But innovation in the classroom is also a risk. And it doesn't always go well. I mean, I have innovated in the classroom and really had some doozies in the past. Like, oof, that was painful, right? And so this trust that we build with our students doesn't only benefit them, but it also benefits us as we innovate and as we try to get better at our craft. Because when we trust each other, we're willing to take those risks because we know that we'll be giving each other some grace. So I want to share some specific things that I do in my classroom to help build trust. But I do want to start with a quick story on how not to build trust. So when I first started teaching as a baby graduate student, I got carded for R-rated movies like well into my 20s. So when I was teaching for the first time, like, I looked like my students could have babysat me. And I also was suffering from a severe case of imposter syndrome. And so I felt this need to establish credibility by, making a greater power distance. I thought, power distance, if I dress up fancy and if I don't engage with their menial small talk, and if I make sure I'm keeping that distance, they will see me as this credible expert that I want them to believe that I am. And guess what? Crash and burn on that one. It was a bloodbath. They didn't like me. They assumed that most of what I had to say was BS. A fair amount of it was, but it was not authentic. It was not who I was. And none of these things are going to work without a foundation of authenticity. You have to be you, and you have to be true to you, because our students are savvy, and they're going to see through the BS, just like they did with me. So first, I have to create the opportunity. So one of the first things I always make sure to do in every class is I arrive early to every class every time. I actually block the 15 minutes before class on my calendar to make sure it happens, and I actually have an alarm on my phone because I forget everything, so my alarm goes, hey, get your butt to class, and I show up early. The reason for that is because rapport happens in the cracks. It doesn't happen when you're task-oriented. It happens on 2 hours too long bus rides, right? That's when rapport gets created. It's when you're trying to kill time together. And so there's always students that are there early, right? And this is the opportunity to shoot the breeze with them and get to know them on a more personal level. So I also like to use tent cards in my class. So I have the students' names get printed on a piece of cardstock that they fold in half, and then they put it in front of them so that I can learn their names. But the way that I have these tent cards is that their name is printed on one side of it, but the other side is blank. And the reason for that is that on the first day of class, I ask them to write the name that they prefer to be called on the blank side, so that immediately I'm showing empathy and giving them some agency in my course. I also ask them to write a word or to draw a picture or something next to their name that they want to share with me. And it can be anything. Sometimes students will write A+, because that's what I want in your class. And others might draw a picture of a little cross-country runner or a camera, or some of them will just write, I love, David Hasselhoff. I don't know, I'm making stuff up. But I collect these tent cards at the end of every class, and I hand them out at the beginning. Because one, if you've read Make It Stick, that's just a great pedagogy book, by the way. Quizzing yourself is like a super duper great way to learn stuff. So I actually quiz myself as I'm handing out the tent cards. I'm like, don't tell me your name. I'm like, okay, give me the first letter. And so I get to know them and learn their names. But I'm very demonstrative in the effort I'm putting into learning their names, because they have to see that learning takes effort. And if I hide my effort in my office studying their really old, student ID pictures from 3 years ago to learn their names, they aren't going to see the effort. And they'll think, oh, maybe I just don't have what it takes, right? We don't want that. So the inside of my tent cards has a calendar. And the calendar includes a day for every single day of class. And it looks like this. So what I do is I ask my students to fill in the smiley face that refers to how they're feeling that day. And it can be specific to class, it can be more general, it can be about life, doesn't matter. And if they want to, they can write any comments that they would like in order to just have a quick touch base with me. Now, I'm not gonna lie. Some of them look like this. Most of them, though, look like this. So I block my calendar after each class, just 30 minutes, and I go through the tent cards quickly. If they write something, I write something, every time. And they get that immediate feedback at the beginning of the next class. When I hand their tent card, they open it and they see that I responded. And it has resulted in me getting to know my students on a level I never thought possible. If a student circles a smiley face or fills in a sad face, I email them right away. So within half an hour of class, if they gave me a sad face, they get an email. And I warn them this. I'm like, if you guys give me a sad face, you will get an email, I promise. And it's funny because they're like, wow, I'm really surprised you emailed me. I'm like, okay. But they're also so grateful. They're like, wow, she checked it. She cares. We talk about all kinds of things on these tent cards. There's stuff about class. Sometimes it's general comments like, hey, I found the GAPS model of service quality to be really helpful. I'm like, cool. I find it helpful too. It can be questions. Hey, I didn't quite understand the difference between GAP 2 and GAP 3. Can you go over that again? Other times, it's more about the logistics of class. Like, the quiz was tough. I wish we'd had more time. But I get a lot of great feedback just informally through those tent cards, and I make changes as class goes along in response, so they feel that I'm really there with them. But to be honest, class comments are probably the minority of the comments. I do a lot of cheerleading. Students tell me a lot. They're like, oh, I have a job interview. And I'm like, yeah, you got this. Or first date, I'm really nervous. I'm like, she'd be a fool not to love you. It really runs the gamut. I get a lot of just kind of general life updates. Like, I'm stressed out, or I have a lot on my plate right now with all my other classes, things like that. Special events. It's my 21st birthday. And I'm like, good luck remembering it. There's a ton of fun randomness. This is probably the biggest category, to be honest. They tell me jokes, they give me fun facts, they ask me questions like Q&A. What's your favorite food? What's your favorite color? What is your favorite place to visit on vacation? I mean, they have a new question every single day, and I'm like, I really like tacos. How about you? Sometimes I get calls for help, and it's actually kind of astonishing how early on I have gotten calls for help. I had one just last semester. First day of class, this student gives me a sad face, and he wrote, "It's just a lot right now." And I emailed him, and I said, "Hey, I've been there, man. Like, let's meet. Let's talk about this. Let me see if I can help you." And he was in my office the next day. And I checked on him a couple of days later, checked on him a couple of weeks later, kept checking on him. And he got better. Things got better. And what I've learned is that students are actually really aching for this. They want this connection. And truly, this has become one of the best parts of my job. I love these stupid tent cards. Would I ever see this personality in an email? I don't think I would. I think that the tent cards are just beautiful. I love them. But don't do what I do. Don't do that. Don't do that. I mean, I have some colleagues who would see those smiley faces and be like, ugh, I'm going to start dry heaving. So you have to do what works for you and your persona and who you are. I have a colleague who does Post-it notes. She hands out Post-it notes every class, and students will just write little comments on the Post-it notes, and then she'll collect them all and address them at the start of the next class. There's a lot of different ways that you could do this. You know, you can do the tent cards if you're just a big nerd who loves smiley faces like I do. But whatever you do, make sure it's true to you. I also give in-class work days. So these are days when the teams get to work on their project during class time. And in having these in-class work days, it creates a ton of opportunity for me to deepen my rapport with students. So one of the ways I can do that is in how I frame the work days on the first day of class. So I'll tell students, I'm gonna give you work days. And I say, look, sitting here listening to a lecture is the easy part. And then you have to go off on your own and like figure out how to apply it. Like, that doesn't make a ton of sense to me. Let's do the hard part together in class. And I also tell them, hey, I know how crazy busy you guys are, and you're constantly getting pulled in different directions, and now you've been assigned to a random team and you're supposed to align your schedules. That's gonna be a rough one. But at least I know on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 1:30, you guys could meet as a team if I let you. So I'm gonna let you, because I wanna make your life easier. So I'm framing it around empathy and understanding their perspective. Another thing I've learned through these work days, the first time I did it, I screwed it up. I said, hey, I'm giving you this time, let me know if you have questions. And then I figured I'd multitask and answer some emails or something. And if they had questions, I would stop and go answer them. The problem with that is questions are transactional. And when you have task-oriented communications, you don't build rapport. We want rapport. So the other thing about questions, transactional, it's that face-to-face thing instead of the shoulder-to-shoulder thing. So now I ask, hey, can you show me what you're working on? Show me what we have so far. Let's look at it together. I have learned to shamelessly eavesdrop because they say some really stupid things. And if I hear it, I can be like, whoa, 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 whoa. Let's fix that right now. I also learn more about them because they're not always right on task. And I've actually found that it's really beneficial to let them be off task because they're building rapport, and that rapport is going to carry through outside the classroom and help them work better together throughout the rest of the course. And if I'm eavesdropping and they say something that I have in common with them, I can be like, oh, yeah, did you just watch that episode of whatever show? And we could talk about it and start to see each other more as people. I also have found that I need to wander around because there are shy students with questions that won't ask them if you're at the front of the room. But if you walk by and you're close, then they'll say, hey, I have a question. And a lot of them apologize. They're like, sorry, I have a question. I'm like, literally, this is why I'm here. Do not be sorry. Please keep giving me a job. And so just having that presence and wandering around and engaging and being part of their conversations during these work days helps tremendously with that rapport building. And across all that you're doing, do what you can to really demonstrate empathy. And, you know, you might wonder why I've put showing empathy under opportunity and not the rapport section that's coming next. And the reason I did that is because if students don't think you care, they aren't going to open up to you. You won't have an opportunity to deepen your connection with them because they will close off. All right, so let's talk now a bit more about that rapport building. So have you guys ever been in an elevator with someone else and you're like, hey, good morning, how are you? And they're like, good, how are you? Good. Come on, we've all been there. Sucks. It's kind of weird. So what I like to do is I tell students, and I follow this rule myself, when someone asks, how are you? Answer with a story. It's an opportunity, right? How are you? Well, I'm actually really good. It's Tuesday. It's Taco Tuesday. And I'm going to try a new taco place, and I'm really excited about it. And they're like, oh, what kind of tacos do you like? Right? Like, it's an opportunity to find things in common. I actually like to double whammy my students with this one, because you know how at the beginning of every class you have the icebreaker activity on the first day? Yeah, I do that too. But this is mine, and I tell students, you're in the elevator with the CEO, and he says, how are you? Here's your opportunity to deepen your connection. Answer it with a story. But here's how I double whammy them. I call this the too much time activity. So their task is to practice telling each other stories as a way to get to know each other. And then I give them way too much time. And what happens is they'll finish the task, and then there's kind of a lull, and then it picks up again because they're bored. And when you're bored and killing time together, you start shooting the breeze, and you build actual, genuine rapport. And so after the too much time activity, I say, hey, did I give you too much time? And they laugh at me, and they're like, yes, you did, haha, sucker. And I say, that was on purpose. Because if you want to connect with people, you have to be here. And it can't just be show up at class at the last second and then leave right when it's over. You're not going to connect with anybody. Rapport builds in the cracks. It doesn't build when you're working on a task. You can, Lincoln can vouch for this because I'm pretty sure I waste the first 10 minutes of like every meeting that we have. Scott Cowley can also vouch for this because my nickname in grad school was the time suck, which was not undeserved, but rapport is important. So another way, show interest and follow up. If a student tells me, hey, I'm gonna miss class because I'm an athlete and we have a competition, I put a reminder in my calendar to ask them how it went. It's hard to keep all this stuff straight. I cheat shamelessly. Sometimes if I'm extra shameless, I will write an email that day and then send it for the day after the competition, right? But I've never been good at remembering stuff. I never remember birthdays or anniversaries, so my calendar reminds me of all these things. Is it any less caring or any less loving to put in a reminder because you know it's important? I don't think so. I think that's just as loving as magically being able to remember all the things. I also proudly let my geek flag fly. Passion and excitement about things is really contagious, even when you aren't passionate and excited about the same things. If you can recognize a love for something in someone else and build on that, you can translate that into an excitement and love for learning and marketing. And so my students know that I love Legos. I'm like, my office is filled with all my Lego builds. I talk about it on the first day. And they naturally start telling me about the things that they love. because that's fair game in our class to talk about the things we love. And what happened more often than you'd think, like I had a student send me a message, and I hadn't had this student in a couple of years, and he sends me this email out of the blue, and he was like, hey, did you see this article about Legos? And I was like, oh man, this is a great article. So this is the kind of thing, it sticks, and it's contagious. So feel free to be really excited about the things you're excited about and share that with your students. It's also okay to show vulnerability, kind of like your professor who's like, I don't know anything about this, right? Showing vulnerability makes us human. This is a true story, okay? So I'm the assistant dean for our MBA programs, and so anytime there's students who have a problem with a faculty member, it comes to me. And it was in this conversation where the student was like, well, the faculty member is doing this thing that's not working and it sucks and da-da-da. And I knew that this was the first time that the faculty member had tried this. And I said something like, man, it can be really scary to do something new in the classroom because you're not always sure it's gonna work out right. And me just saying it can be really scary, it was like this flash of, it was like, the light bulb went on above her head, her eureka moment, and she said, wow, I never really thought of faculty as people before. That one stung. And I said, yeah, believe it or not, we are people. As I told one of the tables this morning, we are all basically nerds with imposter syndrome. Like, we definitely are people, and we're scared to not get stuff right. And I think it's okay to show some of that vulnerability to my students, because when they see me as human, they're gonna be more empathetic, they're gonna give grace. And that's gonna help as we innovate, as we're constantly iterating and trying to get better at our craft. Because I'll tell you what, I know exactly how to get stellar teaching evaluations every time. I bet you guys do too. It's really crappy teaching though. And sometimes innovations don't work out. Sometimes doing new things, there's those speed bumps, there's roadblocks. And so if we can humanize ourselves and continually reinforce that we're in this together, that trust that we build will help them to give us grace to get better. So that brings me to my last one, reciprocity. We should not be asking for things from our students that we're not willing to give ourselves. And I feel like I could say that 3 times. Reciprocity is an incredibly powerful motivator. It's embedded deeply into evolutionary psychology and social psychology and why we survive as a species. Reciprocity and gratitude is one of the most powerful motivators and emotions that you can invoke. And when there's a lack of reciprocity, that sticks out like a sore thumb, right? So if we're gonna ask for things from our students, we need to be willing to give those things in return. So one of the ways that I do this is I make sure that I exemplify ownership. So if I want students to take ownership over their work and their success, I need to take ownership over my part in the process. So when there's something that they ask a question on and I'm like, oh, it's on the syllabus, right? I add, but it sounds like it's not in the best place it could be. Where should it go instead? And in so doing, I'm demonstrating ownership to my student. It's like, okay, I'm getting this feedback that you can't find the information you need. Help me get better. So that when I give them feedback later, they aren't just like, you couldn't understand my writing, that's a you problem. Like, I don't want them to have that attitude, so I don't feel like I should have that attitude with them, right? I also make sure that I always have and give reasons for things. So Humans are storytellers. Again, this goes back to evolutionary psychology. When we didn't have the written word, stories were a way to impart really important survival information to the next generation. So storytelling is like hardwired into our brains. And the thing is, if we don't know the narrative, we'll fill it in. The crappy part is that we are complete jerks about it. I mean, I've definitely done it. If a student misses an exam, I'm like, wow, they don't have it together, or they don't care about my class, or whatever it might be. And what I find that I'm doing there is I'm actually filling in their narrative. I'm like, oh, if I'm doing that to them, they're probably doing it to me. So now I always give the reasons. I control the narrative around why we're doing something. I give the in-class work days because I care about you. You know, I could see them construing it as, she probably just didn't have any content for today. So I make sure that I have and I give reasons so that they know it's not arbitrary and it's not because of some incorrect and trust-damaging reason. But in return, I let them own theirs. I let them own their story. So this is my magic question. Is everything okay? So I state my observation, and then I say, is everything okay? Hey, Joey, I noticed you didn't take exam 1. Is everything okay? And I usually get 2 responses to this. The first one is, yes, everything is fine. I'm an idiot. But thank you so much for reaching out. That meant a lot. So I get that actually fairly often. And then the student has that sense of ownership, right? More commonly, everything is not okay. And the students are dealing with something major and they actually need help. And it creates an opportunity for me to direct them to the access and inclusion services or the counseling services or the emergency scholarship fund or whatever resource they might need. And it gives me the opportunity to counsel them more holistically than just, hey, you missed the exam, so we better talk about how you don't fail my class. Because a lot of times it's bigger than that, right? The last thing I like to do is to plan to say yes whenever I can. And I know I've been talking about how everything has to be authentic, and this might be construed as inauthentic, but I'm going to argue that it's not. So here's my example. I am pretty diligent about protecting my evenings and weekends because I have kids and a family, and I want to spend time with them. Weird, I know. So I don't usually grade things until Monday, but I make them due on Friday. And one of the reasons is because if it's due Monday, they won't start till Saturday morning, and then my weekend is ruined because I have to answer all the questions, or I have to feel really guilty because I know that they'll have to turn it in before I answer their questions. But 2, they will get the B team in terms of tech support on the weekend, at least at our university. And I'm like, oof, let's make sure you're working on this during the work week so that we can get our top dogs on the case here. But another benefit to having stuff due on Friday, knowing that I'm not going to grade it till Monday, is that if a student emails me and says, hey, I have such and such going on, can I please have an extension? I can be like, yeah, sure, take it. Why don't you take till Sunday? You're welcome. And it's this is more of a new thing for me. For a long time, I was like, on principle, they should be able to manage their work and their schedule, and on principle. But I think that it's kind of actually uncommon in the workplace for a manager to not be empathetic and understanding of family obligations or unexpected things that come up. If you have a presentation due, it'd be one thing if it were an external stakeholder and it's a big sales presentation, but a lot of times the manager is probably going to be like, I get it, take a couple days, do what you need to do. So to me, it doesn't actually feel like accurate preparation for the workplace if in my classroom I'm going to be really a stickler for deadlines regardless of what's going on in a student's personal life. So I kind of got over that. And I found that once you can get over the principle of it, life is so much better. Do you know how much easier it is to say yes? Oh my gosh, it frees up so much brain space for like other more fun things than trying to justify why you're not gonna give the student what they're asking for. And if your default is saying yes, that means that when you say no, you actually really do have a reason. And you can give it to your student, which means you have and give reasons. And that is gonna help with your trust and your rapport, right? So the way that we can really build trust is across a number of interactions. It's not something that you do transactionally. It's something that you want to bake into everything that you're doing in the classroom and give your students opportunities to infuse themselves and their passions into their work. Think of ways that you can infuse yourself and your passions into your class. And in the next couple days here, we're going to be learning so much from each other about new things to try in the classroom. And my ask of you is, as you're furiously taking notes on what you're going to try when you get home, I hope that you're also brainstorming on how you can infuse opportunities for trust and rapport building and infusing yourself and your students' passions and the things you're excited about into the course, because that's where you're going to get the students leaning in and owning their share of that educational experience and truly co-creating what your class becomes together. So, thank you all so much.